All right, so today we're talking about something that's been popping up all over the news cycle, the escalating tensions and conflict between the United States and Iran. And if you've been following the headlines, the story sometimes sounds pretty simple. You know the narrative: bad actors, necessary strikes, precision operations, mission under control, boom boom, problem solved. But when you zoom out and actually look at what's happening on the ground, the situation becomes a lot more complicated and a lot more important to understand. Because wars are not just fought with missiles and drones, they are also fought with stories. Let's start with the messaging. When governments communicate about war, the goal is often to maintain public support. That means emphasizing success, minimizing uncertainty, and presenting military actions as controlled and strategic. But historically, the early messaging of wars often focuses on quick results. We saw it during the early stages of the Iraq War. We saw it during the Afghanistan conflict, and now we're seeing similar framing again. However, reality tends to be messier. Take the economic impact. One of the most immediate consequences of the current conflict is disruption around the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical energy corridors in the world. Roughly one-fifth of global oil shipments pass through that narrow waterway. When tensions rise there, oil prices spike, shipping slows, and global markets react almost instantly. In other words, even a limited regional conflict can ripple through the entire global economy. And that's not something that can be solved with a single airstrike. Then there's the question of escalation. Modern warfare rarely stays contained. Iran has a network of regional allies and proxy groups, while the United States maintains alliances and military bases across the Middle East. This means that what begins as targeted strikes can evolve into broader regional instability. We've already seen attacks on shipping and infrastructure, highlighting how quickly conflict spreads beyond the battlefield. Another layer to this conflict is information warfare. Unlike wars in the past, today's battles are fought not just on land, sea, and air, but online. AI-generated videos, manipulated images, and competing narratives circulate across social media platforms at incredible speed. Every side tries to frame events in a way that strengthens its political position. The result? People around the world may be watching the same war, but seeing completely different versions of it. And finally, there's the human cost. Even in wars described as precision operations, mistakes happen. Reports of civilian casualties, such as strikes based on outdated intelligence, remind us that real lives are affected by strategic decisions. Behind every headline about geopolitics or military strategy, there are families, communities, and entire societies dealing with the consequences. So when we hear simplified narratives about conflict, whether they come from governments, media outlets, or viral social media posts, it's worth pausing and asking a few questions. What information are we seeing? What information might be missing? And who benefits from the story being told? Because understanding war requires more than just watching the explosions. It requires understanding the politics, economics, and narratives behind them. And that's the difference between the loud boom boom headlines and the far more complicated reality unfolding behind the scenes. In many conflicts, the first version of events that the public hears is often the simplest one. Governments and major media outlets tend to frame military actions in ways that appear clear, justified, and necessary. This is partly because complex geopolitical situations are difficult to explain quickly, and partly because public support is an important factor during times of conflict. When tensions rise between powerful nations, messaging often focuses on presenting actions as defensive, precise, and controlled. The narrative may emphasize that threats are immediate, decisions are carefully calculated, and military responses are designed to restore stability. As a result, the early public perception of a conflict can feel straightforward, almost like a story with clearly defined sides and outcomes. However, the reality of war rarely follows such a simple structure. Military conflicts involve many layers of political, strategic, and regional dynamics that are not always visible in initial reporting. Intelligence assessments may change over time, alliances may shift, and local actors can influence events in unexpected ways. Even limited strikes or targeted operations can trigger reactions from multiple groups, each with their own interests and strategies. These responses can gradually expand a conflict beyond its original scope. What initially appears to be a contained operation may evolve into a broader confrontation involving economic pressure, cyber activity, regional proxy groups, or diplomatic standoffs. Another factor that complicates the reality of war is the pace at which information spreads today. News updates, social media posts, and official statements circulate globally within minutes, often before complete facts are available. Early reports may rely on partial information or unverified claims, which can shape public opinion before the full situation becomes clear. As additional details emerge, the narrative may change significantly. What was once presented as a quick or decisive action might reveal deeper strategic challenges, logistical difficulties, or unintended consequences. Historical examples show that many conflicts initially described as short-term or limited eventually became prolonged and complex. Political leaders may emphasize confidence and control in the early stages of military action because uncertainty can weaken public trust or create political pressure. Yet war involves unpredictable human decisions, shifting alliances, and constantly evolving conditions on the ground. Civilian populations, regional governments, and international organizations all respond differently as events unfold, creating a dynamic environment that rarely matches the simplicity of early messaging. The contrast between early narratives and unfolding realities highlights the importance of examining conflicts critically and recognizing that initial explanations are often only one part of a much larger and more complicated picture. Throughout history, governments have used strategic messaging to influence how conflicts are understood by the public. This practice is often described as propaganda, although the term can cover a wide range of communication strategies, from selective presentation of facts to emotionally persuasive narratives. During times of political tension or military confrontation, leaders face the challenge of maintaining public confidence while also explaining complex international situations. Because of this, official statements frequently emphasize clarity, certainty, and purpose. The goal is not only to inform citizens, but also to shape the way events are interpreted, ensuring that government actions appear justified, necessary, and aligned with national interests. One of the most common features of wartime messaging is the simplification of threats. International disputes often involve complicated historical relationships, regional politics, and competing security concerns. However, these complexities can be difficult to communicate quickly or effectively to a broad audience. As a result, messaging may frame the situation in more direct terms, highlighting specific actions taken by opposing states or groups while minimizing broader context. By focusing attention on clear examples of danger or aggression, governments can create a narrative that encourages unity and support for military or diplomatic responses. Media organizations also play an important role in shaping how these messages reach the public. News outlets rely on official briefings, government sources, and real-time developments when reporting on international conflicts. In fast-moving situations, early coverage often depends heavily on statements from political leaders, military officials, or national security agencies. While journalists may later investigate and analyze these claims more critically, the first wave of information can strongly influence how audiences perceive the situation. This dynamic means that initial narratives about threats, strategic objectives, or military successes may dominate public discussion before alternative perspectives emerge. Another key aspect of wartime propaganda involves emotional framing. Messages often highlight themes such as national security, protection of citizens, defense of allies, or preservation of global stability. By connecting military actions to widely shared values, governments can build stronger public support for policies that might otherwise face scrutiny or debate. Visual imagery, speeches, and repeated phrases can reinforce these messages across multiple platforms, from traditional television broadcasts to online social media channels. At the same time, strategic messaging is not limited to one side of a conflict. Rival states also produce their own narratives, presenting their actions as defensive or necessary while criticizing the motives of their opponents. This competition of narratives creates an information environment where audiences encounter multiple, sometimes contradictory explanations for the same events. In such situations, understanding international conflicts requires careful examination of sources, awareness of political interests, and recognition that official messaging often reflects strategic objectives as well as factual reporting. Armed conflicts and rising geopolitical tensions often produce immediate economic consequences that extend far beyond the countries directly involved. Modern economies are deeply interconnected through trade routes, financial markets, and energy supplies, which means that instability in one region can influence prices, production, and investment across the globe. One of the most sensitive areas affected by conflict is the global energy market, particularly when tensions occur near major oil and gas transit routes. Because modern industries, transportation systems, and electricity generation rely heavily on energy resources, disruptions to supply can quickly create uncertainty in international markets. A major example of this vulnerability is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway located between Iran and Oman. Despite its limited width, this passage plays an enormous role in the global energy system. Large volumes of crude oil and liquefied natural gas from producers in the Persian Gulf travel through this route to reach markets in Asia, Europe, and other parts of the world. When tensions rise in this region, even the possibility of disruptions can cause immediate reactions in global oil markets. Traders, governments, and energy companies closely monitor events around the strait because any interference with shipping could significantly affect supply levels. Economic reactions to geopolitical tensions often occur before any physical disruption actually takes place. Financial markets respond rapidly to risk, and investors tend to adjust their expectations as soon as political uncertainty increases. Oil prices may rise due to fears that supply could become limited, while shipping companies might increase insurance costs for vessels traveling through potentially dangerous areas. Higher transportation costs and rising fuel prices can eventually affect industries such as manufacturing, aviation, and international shipping. As energy becomes more expensive, the cost of producing goods and transporting them across long distances can increase, influencing global trade and consumer prices. Another important factor is how governments respond to these economic risks. Countries that rely heavily on imported energy may release strategic petroleum reserves or seek alternative suppliers to stabilize domestic markets. Energy exporting nations might adjust production levels to maintain price stability or protect their own economic interests. These decisions can create additional shifts in the global market, especially when multiple countries react simultaneously to the same geopolitical developments. The economic effects of regional conflict can therefore spread far beyond the original area of tension. A military confrontation or political crisis in one strategic location may influence inflation, trade balances, investment decisions, and energy policies around the world. Businesses and governments must constantly evaluate these risks when planning long-term economic strategies, particularly in regions where important shipping routes, energy infrastructure, and geopolitical rivalries intersect. Military conflicts rarely remain limited to the initial actors involved. Even when a confrontation begins as a targeted operation between two states, the broader political and security environment can quickly transform the situation into a much larger regional issue. Modern international relations are built around alliances, security partnerships, and regional rivalries, which means that actions taken by one country can influence the strategic calculations of many others. When tensions escalate between powerful states, neighboring countries, allied governments, and non-state actors often begin adjusting their policies and military postures in response. One important factor contributing to this risk is the presence of military alliances and defense agreements. Countries often maintain partnerships designed to ensure mutual security, which may include intelligence sharing, logistical support, or direct military cooperation. When one partner becomes involved in a conflict, other allies may feel pressure to provide assistance or demonstrate political solidarity. This can involve sending defensive equipment, increasing military deployments in nearby regions, or participating in diplomatic efforts aimed at influencing the outcome of the crisis. Even when allies avoid direct involvement, their actions can change the balance of power and encourage further escalation. Another source of expansion comes from the role of regional groups and proxy forces. In many parts of the world, powerful states maintain relationships with non-state actors or local organizations that share similar strategic goals. These groups may operate within neighboring countries or contested regions, and their activities can influence the direction of a conflict. If such actors decide to participate, they may carry out attacks on military bases, infrastructure, or shipping routes, widening the scope of the confrontation. This kind of indirect involvement can make it difficult to determine clear boundaries for the conflict, as multiple groups begin acting simultaneously across different locations. Geography also plays a significant role in escalation dynamics. Strategic locations such as ports, energy infrastructure, and major transportation routes become critical points of interest during conflicts. When military actions threaten these areas, other countries that depend on them for trade or security may feel compelled to intervene diplomatically or militarily to protect their interests. Even limited disruptions can trigger defensive measures from regional powers that want to prevent instability from spreading across their borders. Communication and miscalculation further increase the risks associated with escalation. In fast-moving situations, governments must make decisions based on incomplete information or rapidly changing intelligence reports. A defensive action by one side may be interpreted as an offensive threat by another, leading to retaliation that was never originally intended. When multiple countries, armed groups, and alliances are involved, the potential for misunderstanding grows significantly. Each actor responds according to its own security priorities, political pressures, and strategic goals, creating a complex chain of reactions that can transform a localized confrontation into a broader regional crisis. Modern conflicts are no longer fought solely on physical battlefields. In the digital age, information itself has become a powerful strategic tool, shaping how events are understood by audiences around the world. Governments, organizations, and individuals now compete to control narratives through television broadcasts, online news platforms, and social media networks. This competition is often described as information warfare, where the goal is not only to influence public perception but also to weaken the credibility of opponents and strengthen support for one's own position. As communication technologies have evolved, the speed and scale at which information spreads have increased dramatically, creating new opportunities as well as new challenges for understanding global conflicts. One of the defining features of modern information warfare is the rapid circulation of digital content. News updates, video clips, and personal commentary can be shared instantly with millions of people across different countries. Platforms such as X, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok allow users to participate directly in discussions about international events, often reacting to breaking news within seconds. While this connectivity can increase public awareness, it also means that unverified information may spread widely before accurate details become available. Rumors, speculation, and emotionally charged interpretations can circulate alongside official reports, making it difficult for audiences to distinguish between reliable information and misleading claims. Another growing concern is the use of advanced technologies to produce convincing but false media. Artificial intelligence tools can generate realistic images, audio recordings, and videos that appear authentic at first glance. These manipulated materials, sometimes called deepfakes, can portray events or statements that never actually occurred. During times of conflict, such content may be used to confuse audiences, damage reputations, or create panic by presenting fabricated evidence of military actions or political decisions. Because these materials can be produced quickly and shared widely, they contribute to an increasingly complex information environment. Different governments and political actors also release their own versions of events, each emphasizing particular facts while questioning the credibility of opposing claims. Official press briefings, state media broadcasts, and coordinated social media campaigns can present carefully framed narratives designed to influence both domestic and international audiences. Competing sides may highlight different aspects of the same event, such as focusing on military success, humanitarian impact, or political justification. When these narratives reach global audiences simultaneously, people may encounter sharply different explanations for what is happening. The result is an information landscape where truth, interpretation, and political messaging often overlap. Citizens, journalists, and researchers must evaluate sources carefully, considering the origins of information and the interests of those presenting it. In such an environment, critical thinking becomes essential for understanding how modern conflicts unfold, not only through physical actions, but also through the stories and images that shape public perception across digital networks. Even the most precise and strategically planned military operations carry a human cost that is often underestimated or overlooked in early reports. While governments may describe strikes as targeted or limited, real-life consequences rarely align perfectly with these controlled narratives. Civilian populations, local communities, and infrastructure are frequently affected, sometimes in ways that only become apparent days or weeks after an operation occurs. War impacts people not only through direct physical harm, but also through disruptions to daily life, economic stability, and access to essential services. Hospitals, schools, roads, and utilities can all be compromised, creating cascading effects that deepen the human and societal toll of conflict. One of the most immediate human costs is civilian casualties. Even with intelligence, precision-guided munitions, and advanced surveillance, mistakes happen. Incorrect targeting, miscommunication, or outdated information can result in unintended deaths or injuries. These incidents often provoke outrage locally and internationally, eroding the credibility of the forces involved and intensifying animosity between communities. The perception of harm, even when unintentional, can have lasting effects on public opinion and political legitimacy, making recovery and reconciliation far more difficult after hostilities end. Beyond physical harm, conflict generates widespread psychological and social consequences. Communities living under threat of attack experience heightened stress, anxiety, and trauma, which can persist long after the immediate danger has passed. Families may be displaced, children's education interrupted, and social networks fractured. In addition, access to essential resources such as food, clean water, and medical care often becomes limited, creating further hardships and exacerbating the vulnerability of affected populations. These disruptions can slow economic recovery and deepen inequalities within societies that are already under strain from conflict. Political consequences are also part of the human impact of war. Leaders must respond to domestic criticism, international pressure, and humanitarian obligations, all while attempting to maintain strategic objectives. Civilian suffering can influence diplomatic negotiations, provoke sanctions, or trigger international investigations, adding layers of complexity to military planning. Additionally, countries that intervene or conduct operations abroad may face reputational risks if public perception of harm conflicts with official narratives, influencing future policy and international cooperation. The human cost extends to the moral and ethical dimensions of warfare. Decision-makers must weigh the value of strategic objectives against the potential for unintended suffering. These judgments are inherently difficult, as even carefully calculated actions can produce unpredictable outcomes. Reporting on casualties, displacement, and infrastructure damage may be delayed or limited, leaving the broader public unaware of the full scope of consequences. Understanding war, therefore, requires more than following headlines. It demands attention to the lived experiences of those most affected, the broader societal disruptions that result, and the long-term human implications of decisions made during moments of conflict. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that the reality of conflict is far more complex than the simplified boom-boom narratives often presented at the start. Military actions are not just technical operations. They are entwined with strategic messaging, economic consequences, regional dynamics, information warfare, and most importantly, human lives. Early headlines may emphasize precision strikes, immediate success, or quick resolution, but the unfolding reality usually tells a different story. One of unpredictability, cascading effects, and profound social, political, and economic ramifications. Understanding modern conflicts requires examining not only what happens on the battlefield, but also the narratives constructed around it, the global networks that respond, and the human experiences that are too often reduced to statistics. By looking beyond propaganda and initial framing, we can begin to see the full scope of a conflict, recognize the stakes involved for ordinary people, and appreciate the interconnectedness of the modern world where a single regional escalation can reverberate across continents. The emerging situation with Iran highlights this tension perfectly between how war is marketed and how it actually unfolds, and underscores the importance of critical thinking, skepticism, and a commitment to understanding the underlying realities rather than just accepting the first story we are told.